Jessica Mitchell was sexually assaulted several times from the ages of 4 up until she was 14 in her own home by her father's friend. She wrote a book about it titled Not Your Princess, and in this book she describes how the man who her, I believe his name was Tom, would sometimes pass her around to other men and refer to her as his princess, hence the title of the book. When Jessica was a teenager, Tom kidnapped her for about a week and her parents knew nothing about this. This is a very, very sad story, and it obviously makes us wonder, why would God allow so much evil in the world? This is probably the most common argument you'll hear from atheists trying to disprove God's existence, and although this argument doesn't actually prove that God doesn't exist, it does make us wonder, does God really love us? Is God really all-powerful if he can't stop all evil? And there is a really, really deep and emotional and philosophical response to this argument. But before I get into that, there's this really, really cool clip that I think you should watch. It's from a Christian philosopher named Frank Turek. It's really interesting. Just take a look at it.
I was in Sioux Falls, South Dakota a few years ago at a church. We were going through all this material over several nights. We had the mic set up for Q&A. The first night I was there, a couple of young men in their 20s got down to the microphone, and they were atheists, and I didn't think anything of it. We just had a good conversation. The next night I was there, about a 50-year-old man got down to the microphone, and he had a question written on 2 pieces of paper, and he began to read the question. 10 seconds into reading the question, he broke down crying. He couldn't go any further. So I walked off the platform, I went down to him, and all he did was he handed me the 2 sheets of paper, and he said, "Read it, read it." So I began to read it to myself, coming back up to the platform. I'm trying to digest this 2-page question. By the time I got back up here, I realized that that man, whose name turned out to be Steve, was upset for 2 reasons. Reason number 1, Steve had recently learned that a supposed friend of his, also a 50 or so year old man by the name of Tom, adults, had been abusing Steve's daughter from the time she was age 4 to the time she was age 14. Right in his own home, under his nose, never saw it. The second reason Steve was upset was because the 2 young men who were there the night before were his sons, who used to be Christians and are now atheists, because they said if there is a good God, he wouldn't have allowed this to happen to our sister. In fact, one of them was going to a seminary to become a priest. As soon as he heard the news, he walked out of the seminary and he said, "That's it. There is no God. I'm done with him. He wouldn't have allowed this to happen to my sister if he was good." So I said, "Steve, it's okay to be mad at God. In fact, some of the Bible writers are mad at God. Read some of the Psalms. Read Habakkuk. Read Lamentations. God is an infinite being. You can't hurt him by cursing him, and you can't help him by praising him. So he can take your emotion." Now, this is not a good long-term strategy, by the way. But it's okay to be mad at God. But this does not show that God doesn't exist. In fact, it actually shows that God does exist. In fact, I said, "Steve, when the right time comes, I want you to say this to your sons. If there is no God, what that 50-year-old man did to your sister wasn't really wrong. It was just your opinion. Because if there is no standard beyond us, then everything's a matter of opinion. If there is no true compass, how can you say he had the wrong compass? Where did his compass point? The pedophile. It pointed to him. If there's no true compass, you can't say he has the wrong compass. That's just your opinion."
So basically what Frank is saying here is that you either have subjective morality or objective morality. Subjective morality being, well, it's just my opinion that raping little girls is wrong. Objective morality being, raping little girls is wrong no matter what. Okay, no matter what society says, no matter what your culture may think, raping little girls is wrong, and it'll always be wrong, and it always has been wrong. The obvious problem with subjective morality is that it's simply just your opinion that raping little girls is wrong. Okay, it's just your opinion versus the rapist's opinion. And if you really want to see this put into action, check out this clip over here. It's a debate between a Christian pastor, Jeff Durbin, and a secular humanist, Jared Anderson.
I work with murderers and pedophiles all the time. I have a least favorite pedophile.
Are they wrong?
He's very annoying. Yes.
They're absolutely wrong.
They are absolutely wrong. Or they are technically intersubjectively wrong.
So they're not absolutely wrong?
No, because it's all a conversation.
So the debate's over, friends.
They are intersubjectively wrong.
So you admit, Mr. Anderson, that they are not absolutely wrong. The Green River Killer is not absolutely wrong. Ted Bundy is not absolutely wrong. Child rapists are not absolutely wrong. And you came to debate that your worldview provides a foundation for ethics?
Yes, the humanist perspective does provide a foundation for ethics because, again, rape is wrong, murder is wrong, according to the cultural conversation that we are all of which a part.
So if a society draws a circle around themselves and says that you can kill and cannibalize other human beings, as long as they're a large enough society that draws a circle around themselves and they determine that it's right to eat other humans?
Some cultures have believed that, yes, and they are part of the conversation.
Is that ethical?
Depends on the context.
So killing and cannibalizing other human beings could be ethical in your system.
If you're frozen after a plane crash and our soccer players...
So like I said, I think you see the problem with subjective morality, okay? It has no basis. It's like, why are you complaining about God not stopping all evil if you don't even believe that there is such a thing as objective evil? I think Christian philosopher C.S. Lewis explains this perfectly in his book, Mere Christianity. My argument against God was that the universe seemed so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing the universe with when I called it unjust? Of course, I could have given up my idea of justice by saying it was nothing but a private idea of my own. But if I did that, then my argument against God collapsed too, for the argument depended on me saying the world was really unjust, not simply that it did not happen to please my fancies. Basically, what all this means is that at one moment, atheists will say that God doesn't exist because there's way too much evil in the world. But then at the very next moment, atheists say there actually isn't any objective evil, okay? There isn't an objective moral standard. And well, if there isn't any objective evil, how can you then complain that God doesn't stop all evil? The whole argument kind of just collapses. But what about you non-believers out there who say that you do believe in an objective standard of morality, but you still don't believe in God? Well, I have one question for you. Where does your objective standard of morality come from? Some atheists might say that our objective standard of morality comes from evolution and our natural instincts for survival and reproducing. The only problem with this is that someone like Adolf Hitler will say that, okay, fine, I'm gonna survive by killing people and taking their stuff, and I'm gonna reproduce by simply raping a bunch of women. Is Hitler wrong for saying that? What objective moral standard are you holding Hitler to? Is Hitler violating some type of objective moral law? Where did this objective moral law come from? Did it come from God? And also, what if Hitler's DNA is just wired in such a way that he genuinely enjoys killing people? Basically, what I'm trying to say is, what if you evolved to eventually reach the conclusion that killing people is wrong, but Hitler evolved to reach a completely different conclusion? I genuinely want to have this conversation, so feel free to comment down below what you guys think, but obviously, be nice. Some people might argue that this objective moral law is merely conventional. It's something that we've just made up as a society, and well, you see, the Western world punished the Nazis after World War II because they brutally killed millions of people. But many of those Nazi officers argued that they were simply following orders, okay? They were simply listening to what their society and what their culture deemed was right. Okay, how can we punish the Nazis for simply following what their society deemed was right? If those Nazi soldiers were simply just going along with what their society said, how could the Western world punish them and say that they were wrong for that? In order to really complain about anything, you need to have an objective moral standard. Okay, so what's the takeaway here? If God doesn't exist, then objective moral values don't exist. But because objective moral values do exist, we can therefore conclude that God exists. Okay, so we've established that just because there's so much evil in the world, that doesn't mean that God doesn't exist. But that still leaves us with the question as to why does God allow all this evil and suffering in the first place? And at least the best answer that I can give as to why God allows so much evil and suffering is because He loves us. You see, God wants a loving relationship with us, and love, by definition, has to be openly and freely given. We have to openly and freely choose to love God. But that also means that we can openly and freely choose to not love God. If loving God means loving your neighbor, loving and praying for your enemies, helping the poor, and being a generally hardworking and honest person, then not loving God would essentially be the complete opposite of that. Like I said, God gives us this choice because this is actually what's needed in order to have a loving relationship. If Christianity is true, that means that the God of the universe is not some distant God chilling somewhere in the clouds, watching us all down here while we suffer. No. If Christianity is true, the God of the universe came down to earth as a baby.
This is a God who rolls up His sleeves, steps off His throne, and says to the angels, any one of which, if we saw them, would just blow us away by their brilliance and their radiance. He says to them who worship Him constantly, I am coming into this world as a baby. Have we thought about this? The creator of the universe was able to create it like that. We can't even fathom our little corner of the universe. He was able to create it by speaking into existence, and then He steps into it as a helpless baby. Born to whom? Born to two children who had just been accused of an illegitimate relationship. Have you thought of that? Joseph and Mary had been accused of an illegitimate relationship. The moment Joseph did not abandon Mary was the moment everyone said, aha, you impregnated her before you were married. So from that moment on, Jesus was born as an illegitimate child to two parents who did not have any of the social graces that were common amongst people who had honor in an honor and shame society. And then as he grows, what does he do? He lives as a carpenter, working with blood and sweat and tears. This is the God of the universe taking on a blue-collar laborer's job. Ultimately, He befriends fishermen and tax collectors and people who aren't necessarily the highest in honor and dignity. And then He pours into them, living with them day and night, going place to place with them, knowing He is going to be betrayed by them. One of them would betray Him with a kiss. And then He would go to a post to be flogged, and then He would be crucified. We put crosses up everywhere. A lot of us wear crosses, not necessarily realizing how rough the image is of a cross. Do you realize that this was designed to be the most painful, the most humiliating way to die ever devised in human history? Okay, Cicero tells us that people's skin was hanging from their body in ribbons, that their intestines would have fallen out just from the flogging process, that they would be strapped to a splintered piece of wood. For every single breath they took, they would be scraping their skinless back on that wood. The creator of the universe did that for us.
And that is what makes the Christian message so unique. The God of the universe is not detached from our human suffering, but He has instead become a part of our suffering. God knows what you're going through. He knows what it's like to suffer as a human firsthand. No matter what you're going through, God can relate. And what makes it even more mind-blowing is that Jesus went through all that suffering, all that pain, all that torture. He went through all of that for you and for me and for everyone. Okay, He went through that so that our sins would be accounted for. That's the love of God. So, yeah, that's about it. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you guys for all of the love and support that I've been getting on my channel recently. My last video did really well, and there were just so many really positive and beautiful comments under that video. Thank you guys so much for that. It really, it warms my heart, and I appreciate it a lot. Yeah, I will continue making more videos like this. See you in the next one. Bye.